Okay. Today's daf, Be'ezras Hashem, is Masechta Avodah Zarah Daf Chaf Beis, number 22. And we're going to be learning some interesting things today. So let's just start with the Gemara on Daf Chaf Aleph Amid Beis Tanya. We learned in a brisa. Now, there was a group of people called Kutim. Kutim were like Gerim, but they were Gerim, the Goyim that wanted to become converts, but they never accepted the Torah Sheba'al Peh. So they keep Shabbos, but they don't keep Chalamoid, let's say. They work on Chalamoid. So Tanya, we learned in a brisa. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Aimer. Reb Shimon ben Elazar says, Lo yaskir adam sadeo lukusi. A person should not rent his field to a kusi, to this type of ger. Why? Because if you rent his field, people don't know that the kusi is renting the field. They think the kusi works for you. And the kusi and the kusi is going to do work on that field of chalamoid. And everybody's going to think the kusi works for you. And it's going to look like you hired somebody to do work for you on chalamoid. Therefore, don't rent him a field. This is what we're talking about, field. Now of a goy, what about a regular goy? Everybody holds shari. It's permitted. Why? Why should it be permitted? The Amre, people will say, when you rent to a goy, everybody knows arisei of it, that the goy is working for himself. He's just a sharecropper. He rented it, but the profits belong to the goy. And therefore, if it's opened on Shabbos, everybody knows it's really the goy's field. So the Gemara asked, if that was the case, kusi name amri arise of it, why can't I rent to a kusi? Why can't people say the same thing, that the kusi is renting it on his own and he's going to work on chalamoid and everybody's going to know it has nothing to do with the Jew. The kusi is a sharecropper. He's taking the profits for himself. He's working on behalf of himself. So here, hi, Louis, we just began. We're starting Kaf Beis Amud Aleph. Arusei, Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Lesley. Reb Shimon ben Elazar doesn't hold of this idea of a person thinking that the field was a sharecropper. Everybody's going to assume that really these kusim and goyim are working on behalf of you. Hi, Sheldon, we just began. We're on Chaf Beis Amud Aleph. So the question,
okay, thank you.
Here's the question. The question is, why am I permitted to rent a field to a goy? If I'm renting a field to a goy, people think the goy works for me. And if the field is being worked on Shabbos, people are going to think that I hired a goy to work in my field on Shabbos. So why is it permitted to rent a field to a goy? The Amrina lay, because we'll tell the goy, don't work on Shabbos. Vitzayas, he's going to listen to us. So he's going to listen to us, even though he rented the field. And technically, it's his field. He can do whatever he wants. But if you tell him politely, please don't work on Shabbos, because it could lead to Maras Ayin, he's going to listen to us. So the Gemara says, then on that case, Kusi Name, Amrina Levitzayas. For a Kusi, why can't I rent it to a Kusi, a quasi-Jew, right, who is a ger, who accepted the Torah, but did not accept Torah Shabbal Peh? We'll tell him, listen, we're renting you this field, but just don't work it on Chalamoid, Vitzayis. He'll listen to us. So why did the Brisa say, why did Shimon ben Elazar say, don't rent it to a Kusi? Answers the Gemara gives you a psychological answer. Kusi loitzayis. A ger, Kusi, will not listen to a regular Jew. Why? Because the Amma, he's going to say, Ano gamirna tveiminach. I know more than you. In other words, I became a ger. I'm a Jew too. And there's no such a thing that chalamoid, that you're not allowed to work on chalamoid. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, why did Reb Shimon ben Elazar say, "My nation nikras al shamoy"? What's the reason that if the kusi is really like a Jew, and he's going to work the field on chalamoid? So the Brisa says that the reason why you don't rent to a kusi, because it looks like the kusi is working for the Jew. Even if he's not working for the Jew, you're causing him a stumbling block, because the kusi is going to work this field on Chalamoid, and you allowed him to do that because by you renting him this field, he's going to work it on Chalamoid, and you're going to be in violation of enabling somebody to do an Avera. So that should be the main reason. And says the Gemara, you're right. Chada v'oid kama. The Bryce is giving you two reasons. Chada mishum lifnei ivar. The first reason is that I'm not allowed to rent to a kusi a field, a field, because I'm enabling him to do an avera. What type of avera? When I rent him this field, he's going to obviously work the field on Chalamoid. Second reason is not everybody knows that it's your field. Not everybody knows the kusi rented it from you. People will think that the kusi is working for you, and it's your field, and you're asking him to work on Chalamoid. So that's another reason why you don't rent to a kusi, but you could rent to a regular guy. Now the Gemara says like this: Hani markie. These are gardeners. Okay, they're gardeners, and they split the work. In other words, they took on a field. And the goy noke b'shabta, v'Yisrael b'chav shabta. It's a field that needs to be worked on, right? Let's say twice a week, one during the weekday, one on Shabbos. So the goy worked the Shabbos, and the Jew and the goy are partners. Okay, the Jew and the goy are partners. The goy worked the field on Shabbos, and Yisrael b'chav shabta, and the Yid worked on Sunday, and therefore they split the profits. The goy takes his half the profits, and the Jew takes half the profits. And really, what's the problem? The only way this could have been a successful field is if they worked it on Shabbos. The Jew is not allowed to work on Shabbos, so it looks like he hired the guy, or the guy is working on behalf of the Jew, but the Jew is worked on the behalf of the goy Shabbos on Sunday, because the goy didn't work on Sunday. So let's read it again. Hani Marikai, they were gardeners. The goy, they were partners. The goy nokid b'shabta. The goy worked the field on Shabbos. The Yisrael b'chad b'shabta, and the Yisrael worked the field on Sunday, right? And they split the profits. Asi lekami de Rava, they came to Rava. Is this a problem? Sharalu, he said it's permitted. This arrangement is permitted. They could split the profits, and that's it. No problem for the Jew. Esvei Ravina l'Rava. So Ravina asked a question from Rava from a brisa that says just the opposite. Yisrael v'goy, you have Yisrael and a goy, shekiblu soda b'shutafos. They accepted upon themselves to rent the field in a partnership. And therefore, this partnership is that they're going to split the profits of the field. Okay, so they rented a field, and they have a partnership. Now, says the brisa, Lo yomi Yisrael tul chelkacha b'Shabbos v'anich b'chol. You'll take the Shabbos profits, and I will take the weekday profits, right? Because it looks like the Jew said to the goy, you work on Shabbos, so that I can take the profits of the weekday. So that's no good. They're not allowed to do that. So this already is a question against Rava. From Rava's case is the same thing as the gardener's case, and he permitted it. Says the Brisa, let's say before they rented a field, they made a condition without anything. They said, whatever we're going to do together, you work Shabbos, I'm working Sunday. That's it. But then they rented the field. So then it's mutter. Because when they made this condition, they didn't have a field to work on yet. So then it's permitted. Now, a new story. Let's say after the work, right? And they worked, and they didn't say anything. The guy worked on Shabbos, the Yid worked on Sundays, and then they want to divide up the profits. So if they want to make a cheshbon, they want to make a calculation, how much Shabbos you worked, and I'll take, you're going to take 7 Shabbosim, and I'm going to take 7 extra weekdays. Usser. That's usser to do. So we see from here that it's not so simple that a goy and a yid be partners, and yet and yet there's no problem of Shabbos, because if the Jew takes the Sunday work and the Goy takes the Shabbos work, this brisa seems to say that it's usher, because it's only because the Goy is working on Shabbos will allow the Yid to take an extra day, will allow him to take the extra weekday that he worked. So that's usher, because it looks like the Goy is working for you in the Shabbos. So how did Rava permit this? So the Gemara says, Ichsef, Rava was embarrassed. He made a mistake in halacha. Then it turned out that Rava didn't really make a mistake, because these Marikai, these gardeners, before they got a field, they made up the deal that the Yid is going to work on the Sunday and the Goy is going to work on Shabbos. So it was before they had a field. And we learned in a brisa, in Hisnu Metchilif, they made a condition prior to them getting the field, then it's mutter. So that was the case over there. That was one understanding of what the case of the gardener was. Rava permitted two gardeners, a Goy and Yid, to be in partnership. But Rav Gvia Mebe Kasil Amar, Rav Gvia from Kasil says, Hani Shisili de Arlahava. Actually, they were gardeners, but they weren't, nothing to do with Shabbos. It would have to do with planting brand new trees. So the first 3 years of working the tree, the Goy took it, because the Yid can't benefit from Arla. The next 3 years, the Yid benefited from the tree. He took the profits of the tree. So Goy, Ochol, Shnei de Arla. The Goy took the profits of the years of Arla, which the Jew was not allowed to. Yisrael, Shani de Hetera. And the Yisrael took the years of Heter. Now, there's nothing wrong with a Yid sending a Goy to work for him on his behalf on the Arla field. So there is no problem there. So also the Rava, so the Rava has nothing to do with Shabbos, Sharalahu, and he permitted it. And that was the story. So the Gemara says, didn't Ravina ask the question against Rava from a brisa? And says the Gemara, Messiah. That wasn't a question. That was just a support for Rava. That only by Shabbos there's a problem, but if they're splitting something else that has nothing to do with Shabbos, for example, the Arla case, that would be permitted, and that's why Rav Gvia says there was no problem that Rava was materid. It had nothing to do with Shabbos. Says the Gemara, didn't Rava get embarrassed from that question? And says the Gemara, that never happened. It never was a story that Rava was embarrassed, or they asked a question against Rava or something like that. So bottom line is, Rav Gvia's version of the story was like this, that the two Yidden and the Goy, they had a brand new field. The first 3 years, the Goy worked the field for the Arla, and the Yid worked the next 3 years. And that was not a problem, because technically there's nothing wrong if the Goy is working on behalf of the Yid, even though the Yid cannot benefit from that Arla, but he worked for his 3 years, so he's taking the profits of the second 3 years, so it's not a problem. Says the Gemara, the question was on Shabbos. Let's say they didn't specify. The Goy worked on Shabbos, the Yid worked in the weekday. No one made any conditions or anything like that. So can they split it up evenly, or where the Yid now will take the profits for a weekday over what the Goy is going to take the profit for Shabbos? Tashma, the Brisa said, Im hisnu v'tchila mutar. If they made this condition from the beginning, it's mutar. Hastama, but if they didn't make any condition, and they just worked the field, and now they're splitting it up, Aser, it's Aser. Says the Gemara, Aim a Sefer, let's say the Sefer. In Bo Lecheshman Aser. So if they actually say to each other, you take, after they're splitting it up, you take Shabbos and I take weekday, so that's Aser. Hastama, if they don't make a word to each other, it's just, they have a verbal, unverbal agreement, where the guy will take the Shabbos profits and the Yid will take an extra day of the weekday profits, that would be mutar. We can't bring any proof from this brisa. Now we begin a beautiful, interesting sugya. The Mishnah says, we know that you can't enable a goy to do an avera. So a goy has a big avera called bestiality. If he has relations with an animal. So the Mishnah says, Ein ma'amidim behema b'pundikoy shel goyim. One's not allowed to store an animal in a hotel belonging to a goy. Why? because you're enabling the goy to have relations with this animal, bestiality. That was a very common problem. So you shouldn't do it. Now, how do you know bestiality is usher for a goy? Because the Torah tells us v'hayu lebasar echad, that God created man and woman to create offspring. And when you have relations with an animal, you can't create offspring. So therefore, a goy is also to have relations with a animal, and therefore a yid cannot put his animal into the barn of a goy because he's enabling the goy to sleep with his animal. And he's over lifnei iva loisitein michshal. The next thing the Mishnah says, isha imohem. One lady should not be alone with, let's say, a husband and a wife of a goy. Because the goy is chayshin al rayas, because we're afraid that the goy is going to mizana with this Jewish lady. His wife is there, and we always say if your wife is there, it's not yichud, but by a goy, their wife doesn't mind if their husband's mizana with somebody else, because they're mizana with somebody else. So the Torah, that's another thing. A woman cannot be miyached with a goy. And a regular Jew shouldn't be alone with a goy, because a goy is suspect for murder. So you don't want to be alone with a goy. So says this Mishnah. Says the Gemara. So we go to Amid Beis. So we're going to assume that every goy sleeps with his animal. So Ramini, then let me ask you a contradiction. You're allowed to buy an animal for a carbon. Now a carbon, if you know it was performed bestiality on this animal, you cannot bring it for a carbon. And yet the Brisa says that you're allowed to buy from a goy an animal that you're going to bring as a sacrifice. I'm not concerned, not for any type of bestiality, and not that this animal was ever designated for Avodah Zarah or worshipped as an Avodah Zarah. Because if it was, then you can't bring it as a carbon. Now, how could I buy these animals from a goy? Bishlama, says the Gemara, muktzov and neved. If it was served as an idol, so then if it was true that the goy set it aside for Avodah Zarah, or he worshipped the animal, like have a mizaban, then he wouldn't sell it. Let us be concerned that he slept with the animal. He made bestiality with the animal. And you just told me that we always concern that goyim, we always suspect the goy to do bestiality. Answers the Gemara, Omar of Tachlifa, Omar of Sheila, Baravina Mishmeid Rav, goy chos al behemtoi shaloi te'oka. We're not choishish, we're not concerned when a goy sells an animal, because he's concerned when he sells an animal, if he would sleep with the animal, he would cause the animal to become sterile. It won't be able to have offspring. So therefore, I'm allowed to buy an animal from a goy because I assumed he never slept with that animal. Hatinach, that makes sense. Nekevus, I'm allowed to buy a female animal from a goy to use as a sacrifice. Zechara ma'iklamema, but a male animal, how am I allowed to buy a male animal from a goy? What are you going to say for that? Maybe he slept with that animal, or maybe his wife slept with that animal. Amar Rav Kahana, hoyul machishim babasa. Even if it's a male animal and slept with a goyish lady, it would weaken the animal. The animal will be very weak, and therefore goyim don't do that for the animals that are up for sale. So therefore, I'm allowed to buy a female animal and a male animal from a goy. Says the Gemara, Ella Hodatanya, we learned in the Brisa, Loichim Behema Meroya Shalehem. You're allowed to buy an animal from their shepherds. Now the shepherd is like a broker; he doesn't own the animal. Says the Gemara, why am I allowed to buy from a goyish shepherd? It's not his animal. Leichish Dilma Reveala. Maybe he had bestiality with the animal because it's not really his animal. Answers the Gemara, the right thing is Roya Shalahen Misyarei Mipnei Shum Hefset Sachar. The Roya is afraid to sleep with the animal, even though it's not his animal, but he's going to lose his reputation. And people will know that he sleeps with animals, so don't give him an animal to watch or to be a shepherd, because it's gonna be devalued. So now, says the Gemara, El Hoditanya, that we learned in a Brisa. Ein Moisrin Behema L'Roya Shalahem. one is not allowed to give your animal to their shepherds. Wait a second. I'm not allowed to give. I'm a Jewish guy. I'm giving my animal to a Goyish shepherd. Why not? Goyish shepherd will not sleep with my animal. Lema, let us say the same idea. Royesh lehem, a Goyish shepherd, Misyare will be afraid to sleep with my Jewish animal, because then the word will get out. I'll tell everybody he sleeps with animals, and he's not a good shepherd. Answers the Gemara, he's not afraid to sleep with my animal. He's only afraid to sleep with an animal belonging to a guy. The goyim know each other. The guy that owns the animal knows the shepherd that watches the animal, that they both have that same bestiality problem. So mir to say. So the shepherd is afraid to sleep with the animal because he knows that the owner is going to be aware that he slept with the animal. Anan, but I, a Jew, he thinks we don't know anything about his bestiality problem. Loymir to see he's not going to be afraid. Therefore, they are disallowed a Jew to give his animal to a Goyish shepherd because you're enabling the Goyish shepherd to sleep with your animal. And the guy is not afraid to sleep with the animal because he thinks you don't know that he sleeps with an animal. Amar Rava said, Hainu the Amr Inchi, there's a famous adage of that people say that machtava glola baza, that just as a stylist etches a script on marble, right? Ragla b'chavra yada. Every sinner knows his fellow sinner. So a goy knows his shepherds that they also have that problem. That they also have that problem. So now the Gemara asks a question. A couple of more questions, then we'll stop. First, the question is, Ihachi if so, Zichkarem minikevis loizdizban. Let's not buy male animals from female owners. Why? Because maybe the guy, maybe she brought that male animal upon her. Let's say you have a female goy selling a male animal. Why am I allowed to buy it? Maybe she brought the animal upon herself. Answers the Gemara, she will not do that. Kevim the Migare Bay, since it's the Migare Ba Mirtisa, since that animal will follow her around, right? Because now that they slept with each other, she's afraid to do it. People are going to say that she slept with the animal, so she's not going to sleep with the animal, and therefore you're allowed to buy a male animal from a female or owner. Ella Hadetani Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef has an interesting thing. Malta, someone who's a widow, a Jewish widower, right? She lost her husband. Loy tirabe kalbo. She should not have a dog. V'loy tishrei be'abeira b'shpiza. She should not provide housing for a young student. So let's understand this. Bishlama babe rav tzniala. We understand why she shouldn't house a young student, because if they end up having relations with each other, the student is going to be quiet about it, and she's not going to say anything about it, and therefore she's not afraid to violate morality with that student. Now, about kalba, why can't she have a dog? Kivin the migaraba mirtasa. She's not going to sleep with a dog, because if she's going to sleep with the dog is going to follow her around, and everybody's going to know that she slept with the dog. Answers the Gemara, Kevin the chishadi le umso masrach abasrei meimer amre inshei hai the misrach abasa mishum umsa the komisrach. Since if she's going to throw a piece of raw meat to the dog will grab it. So people say that the reason why the dog is following this widow around is because she's feeding him. So they're not going to say that she's sleeping with him. So she's not afraid to sleep with him, because if they see the dog following the woman around as if they're best friends, she's going to throw a piece of meat to the dog, and all the rumors are going to fly away. Nekevas, eitz and nekevas, my time aloy miyachtinim. In other words, so then now we learned another thing. We're not allowed to have a female dog, a female animal to deposit by a female shepherd. What's the problem with that? Why am I allowed to? Why can't I bring my female animal to the female shepherd? Because a guy comes to um, his woman friend, and he will not find the female shepherd at home, and he'll find the Jewish animal there, and he'll find the Jewish animal there and have bestiality with that animal, right? So therefore, we are afraid that other goyim are going to come there, find the Jewish animal there, and sleep with it, even though the woman herself is not going to sleep with the animal because you can't sleep with an animal. She's in a cave and it's in a cave animal. The Iba Yasema, and if you want, I can tell you, even if the male friend is going to come to the female shepherd and she's watching a Jewish animal, he's going to rather sleep with the Jewish animal than to sleep with the female friend. Why? The Amamar, Chaviva Aleim Behemtin She Yisrael Yosim in Shesayam. Goyim like the animals of a Jew more than their own wives. So, paladiga thing. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, "B'shah sheba Nachash achava hitaba zuhama." When the Nachash had relations with Chava in the Parshas Bereshis, he put a contamination in her, and therefore humans have this, connection to have relations with animals. It's within the human nature. Says the Gemara, Yihachi Yisrael Nami, don't Jews have that same nature as a goy? And says the Gemara, no. Yisrael Sha'amdu al Har Sinai, the Jew who stood at Mount Sinai, Paska Zu Amasam. This contamination was removed. Goyim Shalo Yamdu al Har Sinai, a goy that did not stay on Har Sinai, Loi Paska Zu Amasam, this contamination did not move. This not remove. Concludes the Gemara. One more line. Ibailahu. I'm going to ask you a question. So goyim are accused of bestiality with animals. What about oifis, birds? Do goyim have relations with birds? Tashma. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishmul Mishum Rab Chanina. Rab Chanina said, Ani re'isi goy. I saw a goy. Shalokach avos. He took a duck minashuk, a goose from the street. Rava. He had relations with the goose, chanka, and then he strangled the goose. Salaha, he fried it, he roasted it, and then ate it. So we see that goyim have relations with birds. Yom Rabbi Yirmiyah from Difti said, Ani re'isi Arabi Echad. I saw one Arab. Shalokach yerak minashuk. He took a thigh, probably a bird thigh from the street. V'chakaba kadei revia, and he made a incision in it so he could penetrate. Rava, then he was mezana with this bird. Salah, then roasted it. V'achala, and ate it. So the Gemara concludes that they goyim also have relations with birds. And it's interesting that this is relative to this week's parsha, because the donkey told Bildam, hey, well, I'm not just your donkey, I'm the donkey that you always had relations with. So here's a Daf Yomi coincidence. Anyway, a guten Shabbos.